Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the webinar. It is July 20th, 2015. As we go back through the webinars to redo them under the new Evoke banner, it's been interesting to me to see how many of the ones that we do that we recommend so often or that are used as a part of our curriculum overlap with each other. They're very similar in their theme, and self-care is another one of those. But this is also one that back in the day when I originally broadcasted, I received more positive feedback from attendees maybe than usual, than any webinar that I'd ever done before. So I think it's a topic that we question and we don't understand as well as we need to be able to do all of this work effectively. It's something we need to hear, maybe even something we need to be given permission to do in our lives. And so I'm going to get right into it with that preamble and talk about what self-care is. Let's talk about what it is to begin with. It's an assertive and honest acknowledgement of your needs. So that's something that can be difficult for a lot of us because oftentimes we are afraid to assert our needs. We feel ashamed. We feel or recognize that our needs at times will infringe on others. For many of us, our value in this world is oftentimes defined mostly, if not solely, by what we can do for other people. And that we have what psychologists call shame of dependence, that inability to ask for what we need or to assert what we need. So this can be more of a challenge than we might suspect. In fact, in parenting, the way that this shows up is we hear parents say things like, I do everything for my child. Right? Everything I do or think about is for my child. Not only is that inaccurate, but it's not necessarily helpful to the process. It's important for yourself, but it also provides a model for your child to be able to say, I can take care of myself. Right? You don't have to. I can do it. And it's okay for you to do it, even if others don't like it at times. It's a request and an attempt to meet your own needs. It's the awareness that you are in charge of taking care of your needs. It's a model for others that you matter, that people matter, and encourages empathic resonance in others. One of the things that parents have often said to us over the years is that their child is unempathic or is the center of the universe. And sometimes we actually teach that to them, right? We have a hard time talking about our needs in the face of our children. We have a hard time saying, I can't do this. One of the most common skills or ideas that I ask parents to incorporate in their parenting, especially as the child gets older on into young adulthood and into young adulthood, is to be able to say to the child, I can't do this anymore. My boundary is not about fixing you or changing you. My boundary is about taking care of myself and about what I need, what I feel comfortable with in my life, in our relationship, in our home. And that's a really important thing to model. I think even with teenagers, mid-teenagers, and even young teenagers, at times we can say that. I even think this has application to our young children. Our answer to the question about why is the boundary, why is the limit, is because I feel good about it, because it's what I want, because it's what I believe. And so we can start to talk and think in those terms as we go through this process. And in so doing, we ask the other implicitly to consider or recognize our needs. It's not guilting or blaming of others for not meeting your needs. Oftentimes in codependency and in this process of parenting children who struggle, oftentimes we get angry at the fact that we're unhappy, that our needs aren't getting met through them, right? We're asking them sometimes overtly to take care of us instead of saying, I'm going to take this stand. I'm going to make sure that I take care of myself in this process. We ask instead and say, I can't sleep because you're not doing well. I'm not happy, right? I'm not eating. My relationships are a mess. We blame the other for how we're doing, how we're functioning, how we're faring in this world. And that burden is something they don't need to take care of. And it doesn't work effectively in our lives. I mean, that's an important thing. I'm going to talk about why do this. But it really does start with it provides us the most complete sense of ourselves. And from that place, from having a more complete and whole sense of self, I can then be there for you. I can then see your needs clearly. I can then separate out what I need for me in this relationship and what I want for you in this relationship in terms of a child. So part of it gives us the foundation for all of the rest of our parenting decisions and relationships. It's not getting your needs met through the other. And that might be one of the closer phrases for defining codependency. It takes great courage to ask this fundamental question. What am I asking of this other that I ought to be doing for myself? If, for example, I am asking the other to be mindful of my self-esteem, uh, I have a project waiting unaddressed. If I am expecting the other to be a good parent or to take care of me, then I have not grown up. If I am expecting the other to spare me the rigor and terror of living my own journey, then I have abdicated from the chief task and most worthy reason for my incarnation on this earth. And this is from one of my favorite books, The Eden Project. It's more about our relationships with our partners and with our spouses, but I think that there's application here. And he talks about this idea that we look for others to complete us, right? And while that sounds romantic and it sounds like a nice line out of a movie, fundamentally it's not intimacy, it's not health, it's not a strength in a relationship. And that doesn't mean that there's not compromise. That doesn't mean that there's not consideration and compassion. In fact, it is only when we do this can those things be authentic in our relationships. Can those things then be something that we give, that we allow ourselves to transform in parenting or in our partnerships? So it's incredibly important to understand how our relationship with ourselves affects our relationship with the other and our relationship with their problems. Those are the three questions that I always talk about. And going on, Dr. Hollis says, Mahatma Gandhi once remarked, "A coward is incapable of exhibiting love. It is the prerogative of the brave. Projection, fusion, going home is easy. Loving another's otherness is heroic. If we really love the other as other, we have heroically taken on the responsibility for our own individuation, our own journey. This heroism may properly be called love." And that, people think that when I use the word in the title of my book, The Heroic Journey, the parent who's on a heroic journey, that they think that I'm talking about something wonderful and great, right? Somebody doing something maybe so sacrificial that it catapults them to this position of a hero. But really, it's this work that we do inside that is the heroic work. It's this work where we fight off our own internal demons, right? And which are often masked or covered or shrouded in shame and guilt and fear. It's when we fight those things from our own histories, from our own past, that we then become heroic. And a heroic person has an amazing capacity to be there for the other person. In this case, what we're talking about is the children. Let's talk about what self-care looks like, some examples. Sometimes it looks like rest and relaxation. One of the tongue-in-cheek assignments that my therapist gives me at the end of our sessions is she says to me, "I want you to go home and stare at the wall for the weekend." And she knows that I have a hard time not doing. I have a hard time not being productive. And so being able to stare at the wall is this symbolic moment of it's okay to just take care of yourself in this life, in this process. You're still okay. You're still wanted. You're still appealing if you're not doing something for somebody or producing something. It can look like a vacation, staring at the wall. Exercise, right? If we're starting to demonstrate positive self-care towards our body, oftentimes that's evidence that we're feeding ourselves, right? We're being responsible for ourselves, for everything about us. Other indulgences like getting a massage, a nice dinner, special events, dates, things like that, things that we can do for ourselves. Going to therapy is a great example of self-care. I think for myself as a therapist, and I've said this on these webinars over the years many times, that I've never known a great or gifted therapist who has not done a significant amount of their own work or is continually in therapy. I just don't see it. It is a job where I'm supposed to be there for the client, right? It's not about me feeling good about fixing people. That's for me, right? It's not about me feeling like I'm better than I'm the expert. So it's an ego inflation. It's none of that stuff. That's all me driven. The therapist is supposed to be something entirely different. The therapist is supposed to be there for the other person. And to be there for the other person, I got to find somebody who can be there for me, right? I got to find somebody that I can go for an hour a week and talk to about anything I want to. I can complain, I can nag, I can do anything I want. I can be a victim. I can be my horrible, rotten self. That's the phrasing she used. I can be there for me. And when I can do that, when I can find that self each week and reconnect to it, then I'm much more capable of providing that something for the other. Hobbies, reading, TV. I use TV because it's a good example that we oftentimes associate with somebody doing nothing, being mindless. And part of this process is that we just get to take care of ourselves in these ways. And none of these ways are overtly destructive or negative. It's time without judgment. It's doing something without judging myself for it. I don't have to complete or achieve anything. Going to the doctor, going to the dentist, cleaning. What advice would you give somebody else if you were encouraging them to take care of themselves? It's those types of things. It's self-advocacy and assertion. And sometimes I talk about this. Sometimes my work is so fulfilling that one of the things I've realized, I don't apologize for the fact that I like to work. It actually is. Now, if I lose balance in any of these areas, right? If I lose balance, then I start to fall into the category, the definition of addiction, right? But part of this is most of us struggle with too much balance on the other side, right? We find ourselves not taking care of ourselves. If my job is stressing me out, if I feel resentful, then it's not taking care of me then. If I love to write or I love to think or I love to read at work and somehow that's fulfilling me, I've learned to not feel guilty for loving those parts of my job. And I'll say something else about self-advocacy and assertion. And this is the most, although I won't get specific, this is the most personal thing that I can share. I realized a few years ago, I realized that the people around me, it wasn't their job to take care of me. That I had to make some difficult decisions to take care of myself. And I was resentful of the people around me in certain circumstances, that they weren't stepping in to defend me, that they weren't stepping in to advocate for me, to stand up for me in certain situations. And then I realized after a while, that's not their job. That's my job. And I've got to do something for myself, and it's going to be scary because I'm going to feel afraid. I'm going to feel shame, some guilt. I'm going to feel alone. And I've got to figure out how to do that. So why self-care? It fills you up in order to give. If you're starving, if you're not well fed, you cannot provide for your children. There's this idea that we find love of self by loving others, right? There's this idea that we can give service to others. And by so doing, we can get a sense of happiness and joy. And that can happen. But if it happens in this codependent way, if we're expecting some payback, right? If it's not its own reward, if the act of service is not the end, but a means to an end, then it won't work. Right? It has to be the experience of loving the other that is the reward, not whether they appreciate it, whether it makes a difference in their life and so that we feel good for this outcome. It's the act of purely, authentically loving somebody else that can reconnect us to gratitude, that can reconnect us to what we have and what we don't have. They can reconnect us to parts of ourselves that get lost when we feel discouraged and depressed. So back to this idea that we have to be in a healthy place when we embark on that to some degree, or at least our intentions have to be healthy for it to work. It prevents stealing from others. I can't tell you how many times over the years my students and clients have a tremendous amount of shame about getting their needs met, and yet they end up stealing from others. And what I mean by that is the attention is constantly on them. I see it with the parents I work with, right? They don't want to take care of their own needs, and so they end up draining the system, draining people around them. One of the things we encourage at Evoke is for parents to go to meetings, Al-Anon, codependence meetings, to go to their own therapy. And I'll have parents that won't do that, that don't want to do that for various fears. And what they end up doing is pulling on the wilderness therapist for all of that. More than just the typical service that a wilderness therapist is supposed to be meeting, but actually taking care of that extra load because the parent can't go out there and get it themselves. I hear that sometimes. Self-care prevents martyrdom, resentment, identifying oneself as a victim, and blaming others. right? In fact, those are evidence of poor self-care. Simple as that. I talked about this idea about modeling for our children, right? A healthy balance. We're teaching our children, we're showing them how to take care of yourself without addictions, without negative, symptomatic, maladaptive behaviors. We're modeling it. And we do. Most of us have to fight some ghosts to be able to do this well. It invites or suggests to our children an empathic relationship, right? Our demonstration of our own needs, of our neediness, of our vulnerability. It shows our children, models for them something, and also invites this empathy that they see us as a human being, as a more complete human being. You deserve it and you're worth it, right? That's an important, oftentimes, condition that needs to be present or added to the equation for us to be able to do it. And then the fact of the matter is you need it whether you want to admit it or not. You're going to get your needs taken care of, one way or the other. It's either going to be at the expense of others, or you're going to do it in a harmful way, or you're going to do it to yourself in a healthy way. It's either going to come out in eating too much, drinking too much, sex, other acting out behaviors, right? Vanity, narcissism, whatever it is, it's going to get met somehow. So if we can't do it in a healthy, productive way, if we can't find ways to feed ourselves, we're going to end up stealing from others. We're going to end up eating too much, if you will, at the wrong table. More about why self-care. Oftentimes our relationships, specifically with our children, we get it backwards, right? We have all these resentments about what our children aren't doing for us. That's not the relationship. It's okay to be concerned about your child's safety and well-being. It's okay to be concerned about the fact that they're not developing in a healthy way, that they're demonstrating dangerous or unsafe behaviors. All of those things are okay, but this emphasis on our resentments that they're not providing for us a sense of safety, even a source of love, is a problem. We're asking for them to take care of us. It is our job to take care of them. And we have to do that from a strong foundation, or else it's going to look like this expectation, right? That's why I always talk about go to peers, go to mentors, go to therapy, go to sponsors. Those are the places to find your mirror, right? To get your feedback, to have your process, to recapture your sanity. It is not your child. There is an old idea in a certain model of therapy called the invariant prescription. And it was this, that when parents brought a child in for treatment, invariably, in every case, they were given an assignment on the first or the second session. And that was, go on a date, go away. Find somebody you trust that can take care of the children and turn it over to them. Let that person know and have access to you so everybody's safe and taken care of. It could be a relative, could be somebody you, a babysitter, somebody you hire. And then do something for yourself. And it was just a way to shift the system away from overemphasizing the child's role in the happiness and the stability of the family. So it's such a powerful dynamic that one of the schools of family therapy that is considered the source of many other concepts in family therapy gave that assignment every time. That's how critical that particular example in this concept that we're talking about is. I had this experience where people oftentimes will respond to a letter that their child writes. And usually what it looks like is if I get a letter, typically in my group, the way that it worked is Wednesday night, my letters would be posted. It's a little bit different for some therapists, but that was typically my schedule. And if by the time I woke up Thursday morning to have my first phone call, if there was an 8-page letter or email in the inbox for the child and I was copied on it, it would almost never be for the child. It would almost always be for the parent to do some kind of healing, to do some kind of work. So oftentimes I would say, let's take this, let's pull this back, let's do this just for you, and let's talk about what you can do to take care of yourself. And maybe even another place that you can go to do it beside your child. And then let's find a way to communicate the thing that's important to communicate to your child with relation to the thing that's going on. Let's pull that out. And it's going to be a fraction, most likely, of what you wrote about overnight. It's important that we understand, look back on, have empathy, compassion on our past. I mean, that's critical. I've said this. My 2 young adult children in the next 30 days are both, I'm sending, it's my gift to them. I'm sending them to a personal intensive, a personal workshop. Same workshop I went to in 2010 that the first chapter of my book speaks of. They're going to that same one. And I'm doing that so they can understand what a mess dad was, and mom for that matter. The only thing I asked for from the people that work at this place, because they're good friends of mine and I've developed a relationship with them over the years, both personally and professionally, is don't tell my child that you know me and that I'm a good guy. Because they need to have their own experience. They need to figure out dad's craziness and pull themselves apart from it. And understand and have compassion why they have the proclivities that they have. And we all need to do that. That's our work. And it's not blame, and we're not, in fact, we're empowered by this. We're clear about this. We're not looking to excuse ourselves or abdicate responsibility. We're looking to understand, why do I tend to do this? Why do I tend to get in relationships that look like this? Oh, I can see my role. I can see the system. I can see the context that I grew up in. I can see where it makes sense. And I can see why it feels so wrong for me sometimes to do the right thing. And sometimes when we make these kinds of changes, we talk about the people around us, talk about who's in our lives, complaining about it, how people treat us. But that's because we don't demand. And by demand, I mean we require it. Or I would rather be alone, is where we come to conclude. I'd rather be alone than be with people who won't see me and respect me for who I am. And we don't threaten it. We don't talk about it. We don't nag others. We just make decisions that are boundaries. And the people in our lives that can make the transition with us, and many of them can be amazing sources of strength and intimacy. And there are some who won't adjust to this kind of work, right? They won't adjust to you asserting yourself, to you telling and living your truth, to you stopping something that's going on in that relationship and said, I can't do this anymore. Or when you say that in my home, I'm not comfortable with that. Right? That might be too hard for some people. And that's what I call culling the herd, addition by subtraction sometimes. And sometimes those people can even be family. And if they care about you and they have any capacity to do their own work, you'll be lucky to see and watch that they stay in your lives. I'm going to talk about some lessons from the Dance of Anger coming up, in talking about this idea that a boundary is a boundary is a boundary is a boundary, and we do a lot instead of it. We say things like, you can't treat me that way. And we say that over and over again. So it has, not only does it have no meaning, but it maybe has the opposite meaning. It means you can treat me this way. We're just going to have a fight about it after you do. And I ask parents to never utter the phrase or believe I'm doing all of this for you. Like I said, that is not necessarily true or helpful for anybody. So in Harriet Lerner's book, The Dance of Anger, she talks about this nice guy syndrome. This is one of the demons, the dragons that Joseph Campbell would refer to as we engage on this healthy self-care. And this is kind of a step-by-step process. We keep it to ourselves to avoid making clear statements about what we think and feel. We lose clarity of ourselves, and there are 3 risks involved. We assume responsibility for others' feelings and reactions. We relinquish our primary responsibility to proceed with our own growth and ensure the quality of our own lives. We behave as if having a relationship is more important than having a self. And that's the epitome of the battle that a lot of us struggle with and struggle at in our lives. So what prevents it? What prevents our ability? What do we bump up against? It's work. It's emotional, physical, and spiritual work, right? It's outside of our comfort zone. It's counterintuitive. We have to walk into places that we don't want to walk into. therapy sessions in rooms and groups and things like that. It's work. And we would rather oftentimes stay miserable and stay the victim and blame other people for how happy our lives are, how satisfying our lives are, even as a parent. We bump up against guilt, shame, and anxiety. We're often taught at a young age that to need is to be undesirable. I use this example. It's from a book called Uncovering Shame. And it's this idea of the shame of dependence. That when we, excuse me, when we describe a child, if I were to say to you that my brother, newborn baby, has a really good baby, she's a really good baby, what would I be describing? I would be describing a baby. You would know what I'd be describing. That's language that we use. I'd be describing a baby that doesn't cry and that doesn't demonstrate a lot of neediness. So from birth, our needs are oftentimes shamed. And oftentimes for a parent, what happens is this. When I can't take care of your need, and your needs might be great, and you might have some uniquenesses that are very challenging to many people, and I might not be able to respond to them. What I will do is I will call you selfish. Right? Instead of talking about how I'm doing, how I'm feeling, what I feel adequate about, what I'm capable of doing, instead of owning that, I'll talk about it in terms of your needs, being selfish in this process. So that's part of how we get conditioned in our lives, and we start to believe that. And more subtly than that, even the frown on a parent's face, the tears in a parent's eye, the frustration on their brow, unconsciously is interpreted by the child as, oh, something about me is bad. This need that I'm expressing is bad. We are taught that selfishness is wrong, bad, and ugly. It's a word, selfish is a word that I tried to eradicate from my vocabulary when talking to my children, when talking in therapy. I think it says more about me than it does about you. I think it's a projection. I think it's intended to shame others. Our parents and others pass on their sense of inadequacy to meet our needs as pathology in us. And that's what I was just describing, right? Our parents and others pass on their sense of inadequacy to meet our needs as pathology or problems in us, right? He's a difficult child. She's a difficult child. Not I am struggling. I don't know what to do. This is beyond my capacity, my ability. I have some limitations that I'm bumping up against. We don't say those things. We talk about the other. We talk about in our partnership. We don't say to our spouse or partner, I feel inadequate. We say, you're a jerk, right? You did something wrong. We don't talk about our feelings in the process. We don't know how to do it. We haven't had any models. We don't know that it's okay. All of those things, kind of things presented. We meet our needs through others, the core of codependency, by seeing our value, worth, and meaning in relation to the other. We treat the other as a means to an end rather than an end. One of her anecdotes from the book, The Dance of Anger, one of the best books I've ever read on boundaries and really extending that to healthy care, healthy self-care is easy. She gives the example of somebody early on in her book who complained that her husband wouldn't support her going to one of Harriet Lerner's workshops. She was actually angry at Harriet for the implication that she could do this if she wanted to. And then blamed her husband, blamed Harriet, blamed everybody because she wasn't able to take a stand. She didn't have the resources internally to take care of herself. And this is the pattern that Harriet describes, Dr. Lerner describes. She submits to unfair circumstances. She does not feel in control of her life. She does not effectively address the real issues at hand. She sacrifices her own growth to bolster and protect her husband. She preserves the status quo in her marriage at the expense of her own self. She avoids testing how much flexibility her marriage has to tolerate change on her part. She feels helpless and powerless. She turns anger into tears. She gets a headache. She does not like herself. She believes that she had behaved badly. In fact, her husband tells her this when she threw some sort of a tantrum when he wouldn't let her go. And so I go through this pattern because this is not obvious to us, especially when it's us. It's a little bit more obvious to us when it's somebody else, but this is not obvious to us, that we're going through life as victims and blaming and waiting for others to take care of us. And strangely enough, We do it with our children, not just with our partners. I love the conclusion in one of the anecdotes in her book where a woman, a grown woman, finally decides to set a boundary with her aging father, finds herself being extended more and more and has to take care of herself and her children and her current family. And she came to this conclusion: no matter how long I'm in therapy, I'm still going to feel guilty if I say no. But if I keep saying yes, I'm going to feel angry. So if I'm going to change, I guess I will just have to learn to live with some guilt for a while. And that's where my idea comes from oftentimes: to do the right thing in our lives, we're going to have to learn to tolerate guilt. And it's going to be a whole new sensibility, a whole new paradigm. It's going to be frightening because we were taught and we believe that guilt tells us to do the right thing, that it reminds us of our morality. And if not for guilt, then how do we know what's right and wrong anymore? And there's another webinar on that, on guilt and shame. But that's why it's so challenging to us and we're so wired against it. So what are the take-home messages? Do it for you. But if you won't do it for you, do it for your child. You know, I say that and there's some irony in that statement. But if the first time that you go to an Al-Anon meeting is because you're being assigned to because the program that you sent your child to requires it, then that's okay. If the first time you go to therapy is because you think that you can learn some things to fix your child, it's a good enough reason to start. And a lot of times when children are in crisis and struggling, it is the only time that we will enter into that arena of the mind and of the heart that we find terrifying, that we would rather not pay attention to. That's why so many of the things that I talk about in so many of the webinars oftentimes sound contrary to what you believe. And I'm not saying that everything I say is right all the time, but many of the things that we talk about, that I talk about, that I teach about, do really run in the face of a lot of the things that you were taught as a child. And they don't make sense. And they seem to be leaning to the exact place that you don't want to go. But we ask you to ask yourself difficult questions. We ask you to go talk to people who will ask you and show you difficult, uncomfortable parts of yourself. And it is my experience, both as the professional and the client, that the transformation that occurs when we do this heroic work, is transformative in our lives, and also it has an incredibly positive impact on the people we love, specifically our children. So if you won't walk in there because you think you need it, the support, it's okay if you go in there thinking you're doing it for your child. Try new things and tolerate the anxiety of getting it wrong, being awkward. Parents will say to me, it happens once about every 5 or 6 families, when I'll do some coaching or some redirecting of something they said in a letter or said on a phone call, I'll hear the parents actually use the phrase, "I don't want to get in trouble." And my response is that you're not in trouble. When I coach, it doesn't mean you're bad. When I teach something, when I correct something, it doesn't mean that you're bad or in trouble. But that's the paradigm, right? That's their childhood speaking. That's their context showing up. Because they have to get it right to be good, right? And what gets in the way of us as parents seeing our stuff and being able to do it is we have to be right and good, right? That's our context. That's what our context told us. And that's why it's so important to pay attention to Carl Jung when he says, I would rather be whole than good. That's why it's so important to fight off shame and guilt, because it causes us to not look at our limitations, weaknesses, and vulnerabilities, because we need to be good. So to learn to tolerate the anxiety of being something other than good, something other than a good dad, is the only way to improve at being a good dad, to improve at being a better, whole, healthy, authentic father, mother, partner, friend. To learn to tolerate guilt, it is not your conscience speaking. I've said in our program that the debate is over. I've been having this debate with our clinicians for 10 years now. And they still want to hold on to this idea that conscience is this somewhat reliable source of good and bad and right and wrong, of morality in our lives. And I've given, and they've experienced thousands of examples where people have done the wrong thing because of guilt. So what I've said to our clinicians is the debate's over. We're not going to encourage or endorse guilt as a course of morality, as some place you go to find your moral bearing. We're going to teach people how to feel. And then when they feel, they can recognize it in others. And they can develop compassion and connection and sensitivity. We're going to act people to move to a place of acting out of courage and love of self that extends then to a love of others rather than out of a place of fear and guilt. Go to meetings. If not therapy and if not a retreat or an intensive. That's why we've started the intensives at Evoke, and I'm going to talk about that at the end tonight. They make a difference. And it's not about talking about your child. That is the question that we can frame a session around. But the thing that blocks you from your truth, from your authenticity, from your deepest self, from your strongest parenting position, that's the stuff that we'll work on. So at least go to meetings, if not therapy, if not going to a personal intensive or retreat. Do less, watch the paint dry, and don't work harder than your child. Again, when parents start talking about, when I hear parents working really hard at home, it's not that behavior that defines if there's a problem, a lack of balance in the relationship. But what it causes me to ask myself and the parent is, why are you doing that? And if you're doing it so your child will get better, it's not going to work. And your child's going to feel like an object. If you're doing it to prove something to your child, if you stop drinking, your child's an alcoholic, you stop drinking so he or she won't drink, you're missing the point. If you stop drinking because you don't feel good about your drinking, great. If you stop drinking or stop doing something because you're taking a different kind of stock of yourself, fantastic. But if you're doing it for the child, you're setting up a dynamic of expectations, of planned resentments, as they say. And you're not really doing it for its own reward. And that's manipulation. And they can feel that, spoken or not. They can feel that. So working hard is just something. And then the question is, what's going on? And can we unpack that? Can we peel the layers back and find out what's going on inside? Forgive yourself for being imperfect. Even forgive yourself for being a perfectionist. And this is not abdication, right? We're afraid to forgive ourselves because we're afraid that I won't work, I won't do anything if I forgive myself, if I let myself off the hook, if I don't beat myself up, because that's how I'm conditioned. That's how people learn. That's how people stay on the straight and narrow. So again, this is inviting a different kind of sensibility, a different paradigm, a different way of being in this universe, being in relationship to yourself and everybody around you. And it's not from a place of guilt and shame and blame and punishment. It's from a place of authenticity and courage and love. And forgiving yourself is one of the great gifts that you can give to your child, because if you forgive yourself, you start parenting them instead of yourself through them. And then ask yourself, are you in balance? Right? Are you finding balance internally? Or are you asking for others to provide that balance for you? That sense of safety and that sense of well-being. So, again, this is an invitation. This isn't the end. This is an invitation to do this work, to be committed to it. I do engage in many of the self-care methods you mentioned, and I work on owning my own feelings, but how do I cope with the feelings when I get to see my child posting inappropriate pictures of herself online, or when she shares things she does with me that are the antithesis of our family values? I let her be her own person, or do I say anything, and I don't say anything, but yet I see or hear the things, I get literally cold and go numb inside. The pain is so intense. Does it continue on the next page? How can I get it to a level where it doesn't affect me? It's something to be concerned about, right? Those things are evidence that something in her is broken. That's what it is, right? It's evidence that something is not working for her. That's what those things are. And that's something to be concerned on, and that's something to act on. So it's not that it doesn't affect you, it's that it doesn't paralyze or blind you. And that the solution isn't to tell your daughter how horribly upset you are, with the implication that you need to stop posting those things online so I'm not upset. My upsetness, if I'm the dad in this example, my upsetness informs me. My upsetness It gives me the energy to seek out support, help, intervention, things like that. But my upsetness is not to necessarily change her. My upsetness is I don't want your daughter to stop. I don't want your daughter to stop posting online so that you feel better. I want your daughter to stop posting online as evidence that she feels better and that she's healing. Right? So it's really important that we understand, and there's some subtleties in this. It can inform you. It makes sense. It would concern all of us. It's evidence that something is going on in your daughter's life that's unhealthy, that needs addressing. But ironically, let me use that example of her posting inappropriate things online and seeking that validation. I mean, this is so ironic. This is powerful. The seeking of the validation through, it sounds like what I'm guessing, are likely sexually explicit pictures and things online to get validation from strangers, from strange men or women. She's just asking, she's putting herself out there so other people feel good about her so she feels good about herself. And if the solution is, I don't feel good about you, you frighten me, you disgust me, I resent the fact that you don't live up to our family values. If I use that kind of relationship skill set, if you will, to try to get her to change, I'm reinforcing the thing I'm trying to cure in her. So we have to find a place to not let our terror, to not let our fear, our horrible reaction and thought, we have to process that somewhere, right? And then we can be in a place to say, okay, now I can address her needs. Now I can see what's going on with her. I can see where she's hurting. I can respond to her symptoms, if you will, with a more measured and flexible response, a response that's connected to her needs, not mine. So there are your needs in this process, and that's a lot in some of the amplification of the feelings that you're experiencing that I think many of us would feel, by the way. Take care of yourself, and then you can be there to take care of her, because we don't want your daughter to stop posting online so you feel better about her. Otherwise, we're causing the thing that we're trying to actually cure or help with. Thank you for tonight's topic. I will be rewatching this soon. Self-care was talked about at Onsite, but never this clearly. I used to think it was just a spa day, etc. Yeah. I know it's one of those things. It's like a lot of things that we talk about. It's hard to define, and more stories and examples and a different way of looking at it helps us to understand it. So let me go over some things that I'm going to talk about. This is self-care. We ask all of our families to go to 6 meetings when the children are with us. Don't wait till the end. Go to these 6 meetings. That is our request. That is what our experience has told us helps families and systems the most, is these kind of things. Follow us on social media to keep up with inspiring quotes, ideas, links to new blogs when they come out. There's our blog there, to announcements from meetings and so forth. Pictures. Here's my book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent. Talked about it. Parents want me to remind the rest of you that it's available on Audible and CD purchase. You can go to the Parent Alumni Foundation page to find my book and really most of the books that our therapists recommend to families, and 10% of the purchases there go to charities for people who can't afford their own treatment. Parent support groups coming up. I'll be last weekend in New York City, either that Thursday before it or that Sunday. I was thinking about doing Sunday. I'm going to be announcing that. I'll announce that by next webinar. I'll be on the North Shore of Chicago, the Lake Cook Road Courtyard Marriott. You can email Stephanie to let us know that you're coming there. We would like to have a good count there. So that'll be 7 to 9 on the 29th of this month. And here's the thing I'm talking about. We've had some great results from these, but they're slow to get going. This is one of the greatest things you can do for yourself and for your child in this process. And you don't have to be an Evoke family. In fact, you have friends that want to come. We won't talk about Evoke necessarily, right? It'll be your work. And that is the Heroic Journeys Family Intensive. This can be pre-intervention, this can be post-intervention, this can be during intervention. So that intensive will be on August 21st to the 24th. Again, contact Stephanie to sign up or for more questions. These are the last 3 that I know for sure that I'll be running. And then I'm training some others and they'll be running them. The Heroic Parenting Intensive, September 10th through the 13th. This is out in our Oasis. A lot of looking at this stuff, personal work. We'll have about 8 or so parents. And then so you'll get to really close to them. We'll do some experiential activities, but it's a lot of work every day. Beautiful, wonderful setting. And then Finding You. Finding You can be for any individual, including young adults. And again, these are, although they are under the Evoke umbrella, it's not necessarily associated with our wellness program. So you don't have to have a child. You don't have to have had a child. So far, that's been the case with our clients, but it's not necessarily a requirement of this process. So these are things that you can do. If you need financial assistance for some of these early ones, as we get started, let us know because we'll be flexible about that. So take advantage of that. Sign up soon. We hope that all of these are going to fill up soon. Here's a pursuits information, just a reminder for young adults. This is Sober Fun. You can go to our website and look for upcoming trips and explanations, and email us for questions about the pursuits adventures, 7 to 14-day adventures. All right, if there are other off-topic questions, happy to go to those. During aftercare placement, RTC Therapeutic Boarding School, have you ever had a parent move closer to the area to facilitate the face-to-face family therapy? We've had that. I've heard of that a few times, yes. Yes. I mean, if you have the capacity and the resources to temporarily buy a home close to the RTC, I'm thinking you have the capacity and resources to fly in as often as you need to. And be careful of that. Because again, the red flag that it raises, or yellow, I'll say orange flag, that it raises for me, is that are you doing too much to show the child, to prove to yourself, to the child, that you love and want to be close? Closeness is not about geography and proximity. Closeness is about the capacity of one to find and live their authentic self and to be present with the other's authentic self. That's what it is. That's why this experience of being pulled apart as a family often is the catalyst for people getting closer together. So be careful of that. And if you have those kinds of resources and flexibility, you can probably do just as well just to fly in. And if it's prohibitive, and that makes sense, but ask yourself, is there some other indirect need that you're trying to get met here? Can you recommend resources or specific qualities of a retreat to look for when researching a good fit for an intensive? I just talked about ours. Somebody else on this webinar tonight mentioned Onsite. That's the one that I went to in my book. You could talk to your consultant or referring professional. But those are some. Ours, of course. Of course, I know about those because I run them. You have Onsite. You have the Meadows. At the Meadows, they have a program called Survivors that they have. They have the Bridge to Recovery, which is in Bowling Green, Kentucky. That's a longer one for codependency, 30 or 60 days long. Caron Foundation does one out of New York, so look up the Caron Foundation. I think theirs is 4 days. Onsite is the Living Center program at Onsite is 6.5 days. Ours are 4 days. We also have a 6-day option that we'll have a couple of times a year. So the Meadows is 7 days. The Meadows, you don't live, it's not inpatient. You go during the day and then you come home. And I liked Onsite because I went there and I stayed there, and you turn on your cell phone. That's the same way it is with us. So those are some. Ask your referring professional, the people that you're working with who got you here. But those are some that I can just mention off the top of my head that I know of. And by the way, when you're talking to them, tell them, say the people at Evoke, Brad talked about it and recommended it. That will be helpful for you in the process. They know what that means and where that comes from. They have a lot of people attend a lot of these that work with us. I can't think of anything better for you to do to contribute to this process for your child than doing one of these. That's why we started them. Because it's the best thing that we know to do, that you have control over, that you can help. I'm struggling to deal with the idea of self-care with my own parents more than with my child, but I think it confuses me as a parent. Absolutely. Of course. And let me say it this way, and I don't know if this is my soapbox or just my passion. Those are probably pretty close together, right? The wiring in your brain, the literal neural pathways that have been established fight and resist what I'm talking about. And they came from your context, a lot from your parents, but from your entire context of childhood. And so struggling with it, if you're struggling, my response is good. That means you're doing some work. That means getting into therapy, talking to somebody. See, when you're in my office, if I'm your therapist, That is being out of your context. Because I'm going to have a reaction to your idiocies, to your mistakes, to your unproductiveness, to your selfishness that's very, very different than your parents. And when you can get out of that context and realize that way that you've been conditioned isn't necessarily the truth, it's very, very powerful. I had a father recently. This is very powerful. He was sharing with me about his young adult daughter who is going through serious addiction. And he came from a very moral, good, upstanding family. But he's beginning to question a lot of things in his life. And it's essentially this he's discovered that the way that he thinks about, loves, and considers his daughter is not the way that he was taught to consider himself when he made mistakes or has weaknesses, because he beats himself up a lot. He judges himself a lot. He feels undeserving. He blames himself for problems in relationships. Instead of his own, he extends that to relationships when it's not all about him. He does all of this self-deprecating thinking and talking, right? But what's happening is he's saying, wait a second, when I think about my daughter, when I begin to have, he's transforming. When I'm having a transformational experience in love and acceptance and support of my daughter. Things that I thought were important aren't important. Things that I thought had to be don't have to be. He's learning about his codependency. And then he's beginning to have questions about his old ideas of religion, of his family of origin, of his relationship with his spouse. All of those things are coming into question because he knows. It's not dogma. It's not teaching. It's not scripture. He knows that he's having a different experience with connection and love with his daughter. And he's seeking for that in the rest of his life. And he's searching and he's struggling. So that's what happens for a lot of you. You begin to have a different kind of experience with your child through this process. And then everything else in your life starts to become more obviously out of alignment with this new way of being. And you start to ask yourself questions, and you start to push, and you start to get outside your comfort zone. And like I always say, you begin to realize that this isn't about your child, that this is about you. And that the changes that are going on in your life change everything. And it's confusing, and that's why you need a guide, and you need some help, and you need somebody to talk to. My son has been diagnosed with processing disorder. Seems like a lot of kids in his RTC also have been given this label. Would you ever consider doing a webinar on this topic so that we could learn more? There doesn't seem to be a lot about this out there. Yes, that will be. As soon as I finish the main recommended ones, Stephanie and I will put that on the top of the list. I will do that. We have one on Asperger's, but that's more narrow and not necessarily processing, but I'll talk about learning differences, processing issues, and Asperger's, and I'll do a webinar on it for sure. All right, that's all. Thanks, folks. I hope to see you at one of our upcoming intensives. And the next webinar is about something called containing. It's a clinical term. And what it really means is how do we create emotionally safe relationships, emotional safety in our relationships. That'll be this Wednesday, 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. So that's about 48 hours from now. So I'll talk to you then. Have a great couple of days, and I hope these help. Take care. Bye-bye.